a great honor to start this meeting. His Excellency Francesco Maria Tallo, Ambassador of Italy to Israel, Alfred Tauber, Dr. Sami Segol, colleagues coming from far and near, friends and especially Eshel's family. Michal, Aya, and Batzeret. Eshel passed away unexpectedly a year ago, and each of us is feeling the loss. I cannot find a better way to celebrate Eshel's scientific legacy than the meeting we are starting today. People coming from all over, people coming from different disciplines sitting together and discussing science. I think that's the way Eshel would have liked us to do it. Trying to combine people from different disciplines, thinking out of the box, and trying to solve complex biological problems and making them simple. The diversity of topics that we have here was very challenging for me. You know, I'm used to do science on concentrating single gene, single disease. And here I had to deal with so many different things that Eshel is doing. And the scientific committee really worked hard in order to combine all these disciplines together. We're really delighted to have you all here, coming from far and from near, students and colleagues. Professor Klefter was supposed to start the greeting, but unfortunately, duty calls. So he had to fly away. He called me yesterday and said how sorry he is that he is not with us today, and that he is really want to say how I appreciate all of you for coming. And the first one to speak will be Professor Uri Sagol, the head of the Well, I joined him to your family, you see. I think it's a good goodbye. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. It's an honor for me to join the Sagol family as a family member. Distinguished guest, Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Taub, Mr. Sagol, dear student, dear professor. It is very emotional for me to open this special meeting in memory of Professor Eshel Ben-Jacob. As Ilan mentioned, Professor Klafter sent his behalf, and he was not able to be here. Sorry. For me, Eshel was a really unique scientist that really described somebody who is really combining interdisciplinarity and creating a really an active network. When I came to Tel Aviv University and started to work on multi-electrode array, I approached Eshel, and since he is the only one that had such a system, and also the nano center head, and immediately Eshel agreed to guide us, to help us, to have joint student, to give us all the algorithm, and created a network of people surrounding him. And we, as a young scientist, really could not, go with the pace that his idea came and his meetings and his interaction. I think this symbolized one of Eshel's uniqueness. He was a living network, I think, of people. He brought together to work with him many people from many directions. He was a physicist working on bacteria swelling. He was a physicist working on biological network. He was a physicist working on neuronal network in vitro and in vivo. And I think he did everything really excellent, and he was he moved forward, I think, very, very fast, and it was, I think, a bit ahead of time in many cases. Another uniqueness of Eshel was that 5 years ago, he called me and suggested to me to meet Dr. Shai Efrati from Asaf HaRofeh. At that time, I didn't know Shai, and Asaf HaRofeh was too long distance from Tel Aviv University, and I tried to politely say that maybe next week, maybe the next one, but with Eshel, it was impossible to discuss. After a few weeks, he convinced me to meet Shai, and I think this was a great meeting, and since then, me and Shai are collaborating. The network has expanded significantly, and I would leave Shai to describe the work that is being done in the center of hyperbaric oxygen therapy in Asaf HaRofeh. Another occasion that happened a few years ago, exactly 5 years ago, was the establishment of the Segol School of Neuroscience. Segol School of Neuroscience was established in Tel Aviv in order to bring together scientists from different faculties, from different disciplines, to work together on a specific topic of brain science. And this exactly reflects Eshel's idea, and as such, Eshel had a great place of honor in the school. He was collaborating a lot with many of the people, creating many activities, and very active in the school in all occasions. Now, following Eshel's unexpected death, we must continue to move forward Eshel's legacy of interdisciplinarity and working as part of a network. As we all know, the added value of this combination is enormous. So at the Segol School of Neuroscience, we have decided to create a unique platform for collaboration between scientists from different disciplines. And we have decided to establish the Eshel Ben-Jacob SNP grant. This is the Segol School of Neuroscience Interdisciplinary Partnership Grant, or SNP, for enhancing interdisciplinary research and collaboration. We had a call a couple of months ago to all the members of the school, and we received 24 of excellent interdisciplinary projects, really bringing people from many disciplines. We had to work hard in order to choose the 5 ones. I just want to show you the 5 topics that were chosen to be the starting Eshel Ben-Jacob SNPs. And as you can see, the diversity is unique. We have people coming from management, Dino Levy, working with Oded Rechavi from life science, trying to examine economic behavior of simple nervous system. We have Mary Plotnik from medicine, collaborating with Liad Mudrik from psychology, and they are going to use virtual reality to study unconscious processes. We have Danny Frankel and Uri Gofna from neurobiology and biotechnology, and they are going to study the gut microbiome and relapse and remission in multiple sclerosis. Daphne Ben Basat from Ichilov and Uri Nevo from engineering. You can see the different directions that are combining here. We're going to quantify cellular size in brain tissue. And Yossi Yovel from zoology and Yaniv Asaf from neurobiology are going to work on evolution of mammalian connectome. So as you see, this really reflects, I think, Eshel's vision to combine people from different disciplines, to combine the power of knowledge that people are bringing from different disciplines. And I hope that this will really move forward his legacy. And we hope that this will continue the legacy for many new scientists that will continue to develop interdisciplinary and network collaboration. Thank you very much.
Eshel was one of the first to establish a close collaboration between Italy and Israel. And I think the most appropriate is the ambassador of Italy coming and addressing this audience. His Excellency.
Well, dear friends, we have a common friend today, not to commemorate, but to celebrate. And I think it has been already said that this is really the best location and the best environment to do this. And also, say the best timing. I remember I met last time Eshel Ben-Jacob more or less exactly 1 year ago. He was coming back from the US, a long trip, and we had a big conference at the Rabin Center. And, but he wanted to be with us and to celebrate a big meeting of Israeli and Italian researchers, scientists, and to celebrate his friend, Commendatore Sami Sagol, who is here with us today, who was awarded by the Italian Republic. Then, so I was so happy and very nice mood. And then after a few days, I met again Tova and Sami Sagol in Masada, at the opera. We were there and they were so sudden. They were not in the spirit, I thought, to find them in Masada. They just had news of this passing away. And, well, this really changed the mood of the evening. Well, we can say many things about what one could have done, etc. But it's important to remember what has been done and is continuing to be done. Because once you throw a seed, it continues to flourish, to produce. And this is what we are doing now. I'm really proud of the work we are doing together with Tel Aviv University. I think this is a place where we can really do things in a very concrete way. It's not so much about discussing, but to do facts. Now there are many discussions about BDS, boycotts, etc. I think the best answer is just working. Do facts, put people together. Today we are just starting something, quite a challenge we wanted to try. We like challenges. And Stefano Borcaletti, our scientific attaché, who is here, is always raising the bar. So this year it says, now we want to do 10 scientific conferences, meetings simultaneously. Well, luckily, they are not 100% simultaneously, so this one is the very first to start. So in this moment, you are the only one walking, but at a certain point tomorrow, there will be really 10 together. And so I'll try to jump from one to the other. I don't think I will attend all the 10, but this was particularly important for me to be present. And it's quite a challenge. We are going to have many researchers from Italy, and we have some here, also because this is the place where we started one of the most successful joint labs we have between Israel and Italy, the neuroscience one. And we are also going to have an important delegation of the presidents of the rectors of the Italian university, the Conference of the Rectors of the Italian Universities, which is the institution which regroup the hundreds of Italian universities. I don't know how many there are there. Maybe Stefano knows. I think 100. What? More than 100. More than 100. Okay. So there is a large number of universities represented, and they are here. They are here to say we want to work with Israel. The nature of universities to be open. Otherwise, they are not universities. The nature of universities to be free. Otherwise, they are not universities. This is also what has been said here a few days ago very nicely by Rabbi Sachs about universities as the baluard, as the great defenders of freedom. And in this sense, I think that Ben-Jacob was really a leader. Also because another characteristic of university, I think, is to be interdisciplinary. Is this the name which says this? They have to be universal, to regroup different faculties, different departments and branch of studies, and people coming from different areas in all senses with different idea. And this happens here, and this is also somehow the nature of his studies, because we live in a complex world. I won't say complex society, it's much more. A complex world, because we have a complex body, there is a complex biology, We have complex matter around us. There is a complex physics. And we interrelate each other in a complex way. And I remember also another nice event we did together with Eshel Ben-Jacob. It was December 14, 14, when a very interesting group of scholars of economics met together with scholars of physics, studying the complexity also of relations which exists, and we don't know if there are rules. There are, but we have to know the rules. In this field of social sciences. It was very interesting. I remember the closure was with the former finance minister. Was more or less the last day of his permanence. And it's a world of complexity. So I really hope you not so much to render this complexity simple, because it's fascinating as it is, but somehow understandable, at least a little bit more. And of course, hope to see you again in 2 days, on Thursday morning, when we are all having, let's say, the meeting of all these groups. So it's already somehow a complex system meeting. And so the representatives, the people who attended all the 10 seminars meeting at the Perez Center on Thursday morning. So I look forward to seeing you on Thursday morning. And of course, all this is also in the framework of the celebration of the Italian National Day, which happens to be exactly on Thursday, on the 2nd of June. And in this occasion also, we want to have somehow a special way to mark it. So it's not going to be a normal special, let's say, National Day, but we are going to have our Education and Science Minister. It's only one minister. I think it's important to have only one minister having together education and science. And she is coming with the Conference of Rectors. She's going to meet with all of you. She's going to visit Israel. I think that this is important because, as it is said in the slogan, in the logo you've seen earlier, we have strong roots. And it's because of these strong roots that we are confident to have a great future. Among the roots, I would like also to mention another endeavor we are developing, which is the Italian translation of Talmud. In these days, we are having also here a team led by the Chief Rabbi of Rome, which is committed to quite a large work inspired by Rav Adin Steinsaltz. And the first volume has been published, and what is more important, has been sold a lot. So it's already at the 3rd printing, and it's going very well. And it has been developed by quite a large team of scholars, an interdisciplinary team, a team which includes scientists, includes people who are studying old biology, botanics, and many other branches. Really an encyclopedic group which is using a new software which has been developed specifically for this purpose by an Italian research group. So I think this is very interesting. It has been presented a few days ago to the Italian President of the Republic, and it will be again presented to President Rivlin in a few days. These are our strong roots, and our great future are you. Thank you very much.
Professor David Edelman from School of Physics that work a lot with Eshel.
His Excellency, dear guests, participants, friends, and family of Eshel. I would like to welcome you all to this conference on complex systems in the memory of the late Professor Eshel Ben-Jacob. I speak both as an old friend and colleague of Eshel, and as well as a previous chair of this university physics school, and this is where Eshel studied in the 1970s and where he worked throughout his academic career. Let me just tell you a little bit about Eshel's and his contribution, although I'm sure that many of you know it, and you can find it also on the website of this conference. Personally, I first met Eshel when he was a Navy officer and in parallel completed his BSc studies in physics at this university. This was about over 40 years ago. After his military service, Eshel did his PhD on Josephson Junction under the supervision of David Bergman and Joe Imrie, and then followed that with a postdoc at the Kavli Institute for Theoretical Physics at University of California, Santa Barbara, where he worked on Coulomb blockade, and together with Jim Langer and several other fellow postdocs on the six-fold symmetry of snowflakes and their out-of-equilibrium growth. After his postdoc, Eshel first joined the University of Michigan, and from 1986, he's a member of our School of Physics and Astronomy. Over the years, Eshel supervised a large number of students, postdocs, and research associates. Many of them are in the audience. He also maintained research ties with a large number of researchers all over the world. And in particular, he was a fellow of the Center of Theoretical Biological Physics, first at the University of California in San Diego, and more recently at Rice University. In addition, at our university, he held an adjunct professorship at the Sagol School of Neuroscience, as we heard from Professor Uri Asher, is the head of the school. And I think that also Professor Herbert Levin of Rice University, with whom Eshel maintained very close ties over the year, will talk after me and will further elaborate on Eshel's contributions. Eshel's research was extremely diverse and varied and included both modeling and experimental studies. He was one of the most original and unique members of our physics department. When he joined the school in the 1980s, his interest lied in out-of-equilibrium, classical and quantum physical systems, but very soon he expanded his interest and addressed many issues on complexity in general, and more specifically, biocomplexity and physics of living systems. Just to name a few examples, Eshel studied physical microbiology, decision-making, and self-organization of bacterial colonies, and swarming of bacteria, insects, birds, and fish. Other topics included information encoding and storage in neural networks, and more recently, immunology, the use of statistical physics to analyze the stock market, and even cancer and epilepsy seizures. This is an impressive scope of scientific activity that was encapsulated in just one person, Eshel. It obviously included his origin in physics, but also math, statistics, chemistry, biology, electrical engineering, psychology, neuroscience, and even economy and finance. Just amazing. Besides his activity as a researcher at the university, Eshel was instrumental in developing in our department new study programs. For example, he was one of the founders of the very successful combined BSc program in physics and electrical engineering, and later also in a similar program of combining physics and biology. He helped to establish the Nano Center at Tel Aviv University and was the president of the Israeli Physical Society. Eshel devoted considerable amount of time and energy to scientific education in high school. He served for 5 years as the chair of the Physics Advisory Council at our Ministry of Education and was involved in new initiatives to bridge the gap between high school and academia. Eshel received over the year many honors and awards. In Israel, he received the Landau Prize and the Weizmann Prize, just to name two. He was a fellow of the American Physical Society, and a year before he died, Eshel was elected to the prestigious American Philosophical Society, founded by Benjamin Franklin. And as we heard from His Excellencies, the Ambassador of Italy, Eshel received a special recognition for his contribution from the Italian government, who is also co-sponsoring this conference. As the chair of the School of Physics, I witnessed firsthand his escalating health problem in recent years. I often was amazed by his never-ending stamina and courage struggle to continue his vast research and academic activity in spite of the debilitating illness. I often seek his advice on departmental issues. Okay. Okay. I often seek his advice, in spite of the illness, on departmental issues, and he often offered original and creative solutions. Michal, this is something that you will like now. In statistical physics, we have this concept of free energy. You are familiar with that, I think. Any physical system should minimize its free energy, which is composed of enthalpy and entropy. Enthalpy, in some sense, represents a convergence toward more ordered state, while entropy represents the disorder. The free energy which characterizes many complex systems is a delicate balance between order and disorder. Eshel was the entropy in our department. Often challenging wisdom and standard ways of looking at things. Sometimes he came up with really crazy ideas, but often they were innovative and witty. I remember that a few months before he died, we had a personal conversation over the internet. I told him that every university department should have at least one researcher like him. It adds color and flavor to the department. However, a department that is composed exclusively of researchers like him will explode in a few days. Too much entropy. Eshel agreed with me and laughed. And this was one of our last encounters. The program of this conference encompasses much of Eshel's activities and interest in complex systems. He would have extremely enjoyed it. I wish you all an exciting and fruitful conference. Thank you.
Professor Tauber?
I have a PowerPoint.
Okay.
If you can help me.
This one?
That's it. Okay. Perfect. I'm most honored to be able to offer some personal reflections about Eshel. I have had the privilege of being close with him over the past 12 years and witnessed, I think, his most productive period. The photograph here of Eshel, you can't tell, is him standing on a sand dune, obviously. And I want to give you a more telescopic view of Eshel as a person, if I can. I first met him in 2004 when I gave a lecture at the Cohen Institute. It was about immunology, and it was featuring the gentleman on the right, Elie Metchnikoff, who was one of the originators of immune theory. And there were a lot of people in that audience, but the only one who came up to me afterwards and asked me really interesting questions was Eshel. And as a result, we started to engage in a discussion about immunology. Now, frankly, he didn't know very much about immunity. In fact, he hardly knew anything. But he saw something which was extremely resonant with his own interests, which is that the immune system is terribly complex. And he had, of course, been working for a number of years on the bacterial colonies which formed these extraordinary fenestrated patterns. And I told him that the immune system was a complex system, but so much more complex with all of these various elements, and obviously I have no intention of you seeing them. The idea is that I saw that Eshel had a handle on complex systems, and wouldn't it be nice to discover some underlying principles which controlled the bacteria and might be extrapolated into a more complex system, i.e. the immune system. So we talked and we talked and we talked, and eventually I was given the privilege of being a visiting professor, Sackler visiting professor, and the president at that time, Itamar Rabinovich, said, what would you like to do? And I said, well, what can I do? And he said, well, you have a passport to the university. And I said, okay, I want a laboratory in the medical school. Now, for any of you who know the diplomacy, or I should just simply say the politics of Israeli universities, to have someone just come from the outside and demand a laboratory was extraordinary. And the reason I did was that Eshel was doing these bacterial studies in the basement with Ina, and the brilliant boarders of the university wouldn't allow him to do the molecular biology, the physics division. So we decided I would open a medical school laboratory, he would pursue the bacterial studies, and everyone would be happy, of course, except the dean of the medical school. But that's all right. We weren't terribly concerned about him. I don't really know what I'm doing here, do I? How do I advance? Space. Good. So shortly after that 2004 lecture, Eshel came and visited me on my farm in New Hampshire. He pushed my wife aside while she was making dinner. He insisted on making dinner, and it wasn't all that good, but it doesn't matter. Eshel clearly had a vision of what should be. And when we tried to serve him a chicken salad sandwich, he wouldn't eat it because there was egg in it, and he literally took the biblical injunction against a kid suckling in its mother's milk, which most normal people would consider to be the separation of milk and meat. He decided eggs were much more close to the chicken in these terms than otherwise, and so we learned about that. Over a long period of time, or at least it seems now a long period of time, I was educating Eshel about immunology, and with his brilliance, he interjected some computational analyses of some data that was being generated at the Weizmann Institute with Yaron Cohen, and at the top, you can see, first of all, the paper that was very theoretical about information. Eshel was philosophically inclined, but not terribly philosophical. It's difficult for me to explain that, and I won't bother. But the point is, we wrote a speculative paper, which I think is very interesting. And then we moved to the science per se, and this is the first of a series of papers that were published together. I really was a very passive member, but he insisted on putting me on the paper because he said that, in fact, I had generated some ideas. I have to say, if I did, it was most minimal. But in any case, it was a very interesting and productive collaboration for me. And although we didn't solve the complexity of the immune system, we certainly learned a lot about how its basic organization might be constructed and its fundamental structure, and that is, frankly, important. So you can't see this picture either, but there's Michal in the middle, and Eshel is on the... Well, that's all I had. And, you know, it's your fault for standing in the shadow. In any case, and I'm on the left. And this is a photograph of a trip that we took to Petra. And why am I going to talk about Petra? Well, you'll see in a moment. This is from a building in Wadi Rum, And it's picturesque, I mean, literally, right? So I thought it was quite creative to create this picture of Wadi Rum as a picture, because it's really quite irreal. This is the Seven Pillars, the famous place where T.E. Lawrence wrote his memoirs. And we went on to tour Petra. There's our wonderful guide, and Eshel had a great time. And so, you know, Raiders of the Lost Ark was filmed there, and the Neptunians are lost. We don't know anything about them. But the most important and impressive part of the trip wasn't the ruins, but these extraordinary rock exposures. The wind comes whistling through this very narrow valley and eroded the cover layer to expose, like waves in the water, these rock formations. And here's a close-up of it. And here's an extraordinary shot. You can see there's a hole, a light hole there, and a woman standing in the middle. And I'm just showing you this aesthetic, noteworthy sight, because I think, at least when I look back, this is what I see. Eshel had an extraordinary intuition. He had an extraordinary aesthetic, organizational mind. And when he looked at these Petri dishes, which he's most famous for, I am quite sure, after discussing them many, many times, that he saw beauty there. So I see Eshel as a natural philosopher. Darwin was a natural philosopher. In fact, scientists weren't scientists as such until a British scientist, philosopher named Wheel coined the term scientist in 1840 or 41, and it had a pejorative sense then. It was somebody who was out to make money. Now, of course, we don't have any idea what that might be about today, but it wasn't until the end of the 19th century that scientists became a noble profession. But Eshel was a natural philosopher. And what I mean by that is that philosophy was the bedrock of science, and those who studied nature were called natural philosophers, and as I mentioned, Darwin himself referred to himself as such. And I believe that Eshel's fundamental scientific orientation was about the wonder of nature, which is how science began. Of course, with Francis Bacon, in the 16th century, science was sold as a means for economic, military, agricultural, even clinical success. But its origins, its deepest origins, are in the wonder of nature. And Eshel truly was captivated by nature as such. And that's why he was able to move from field to field to field, where he saw unifications, where he saw patterns, where he saw, through a brilliant intuition, an underlying theme that he would explore, whether it was in cancer or bacteria or immunology or neuroscience or electrical engineering or whatever. And these patterns, he knew best, of course. They came out as particular expressions of solving a problem. But I think Eshel's genius was truly intuitive, that he really saw underlying the phenomena some pattern which perhaps derived from his physics training, that he was looking for a simplification, a unification. And for me, Eshel had a great aesthetic sense. And that's why I brought out the rocks at Petra, and why I believe that we might consider him unique in another fashion. Thank you for your attention.
Segol.
my regards to the ambassador who had to leave, and Professor Stefano Boccaletti, Michal and Eshel Ben-Jacob, honorable speakers and guests. First, my personal hug to Michal and Aya. So happy to see you here. I think you must be very proud of what is being done today in honor of Eshel. And I think he would have been very proud of too. My salute to Ambassador Tola and Talmud, the Italian Embassy, Tel Aviv University, for arranging this wonderful event. Developing the relationship between Italy and Israel and commemorating our mutual friend Eshel Ben-Jacob, Eshel, together with Stefano, did a great job in setting the path of such relationship. And I saw Stefano to be his best friend in Italy. And I know it is very hard for you to remember Eshel, but you must be very proud to have him here with us in commemoration. It has been exactly a year since I received my Italian Knighthood award during the 2015 conference. Eshel, as a fellow Italian knight, made a great effort to honor me and the ambassador and attend the event. Unfortunately, it was a great event, but it was the last time that I met Eshel. A few days later, as the ambassador remembers, I got a message that he was not with us. I lost a dear friend that day. It was very sad. A partner and a wonderful person. Eshel was a daring scientist who brought great pride to his family, the research community, and the State of Israel. A rare combination of wisdom, emotional intelligence, and a unique ability to develop international relationships. No wonder he was among the very few scientists elected to the American Philosophical Society. Eshel came to change the world. This is my belief, and I think he believed in this too. He set the path and taught all of us how to dream. Now it is our commitment to continue in that path, exploring and developing unconventional solutions. Changing perceptions and aiming to improve the quality of life and regenerate ourselves. Eshel nurtured and raised generations of students and research partners. I know they are all working day and night, just like he did, on taking his vision and idea even farther. Dr. Efrati, who will present his next session, is just one example. He will change the world. He had a great teacher and partner. On a personal level, I also learned a lot from Eshel. From that day that we met by chance in a scientific conference and in Tel Aviv University, we had so much in common. From the shared vision to his interest to help and develop the Sagol Neuroscience Network. Eshel will continue to be there with me and as I maintain to quest and fulfill his vision. And it's also my vision, exploring the way to live healthier, happier, and longer life. This is one side of Eshel's vision. I know Italian-Israeli initiatives will play a role in this vision. Ambassador Talmud, Professor Boccaletti, your presence here is really assuring that we will continue to do it together. Thank you, and have a good conference.
Dana Venkart, She's an high school student.
Well, it was previously told here about what Eshel did in order to give high school students the chance to enter the world of academic research, and I can be a witness to that. When I met Eshel, I was 15, and I was attending a research program for high school students here at Tel Aviv University, in which Eshel gave us a lecture about neural polymorphism. He was the only lecturer who, after the lecture, gave us his email and his phone number and told us to come with any question that we have. This was during Tzuk Eitan, and I was staying here at Tel Aviv. And at one of the nights, we woke up, there was an alarm, and I opened my laptop afterwards to tell my parents I'm alive. And I saw that Eshel answered an email I sent him with a question at 4 in the morning. And that's something that was continually very much clear about Eshel, the way he treated me and any of the students he had as equals. He gave me an amazing opportunity and introduced me to amazing people. And he very much inspired me, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity he gave me. And the best way I can describe how I was so motivated and inspired by Eshel is in this little anecdote. In my first meeting with Eshel, he offered me a deal. He told me, I will treat you just like any of my students. In return, you will act just like any of my students. I think this was probably one of the best deals I've ever made. And he truly made me feel like I was no lesser than any of the students, even though I was only 15 at the time. And Eshel, he had the amazing ability to make any subject interesting. He was able to give you the feeling that you're always doing your very best, and at the same time that you can always get better. And any conversation, and it does not matter if it was about science, physics, neuroscience, or even literature, was fascinating. And he always gave me the feeling that I'm equal to any one of his students, in spite of my young age and the fact that I had no experience and no previous knowledge. But he inspired me to study and to learn and to explore and to research. For me, Eshel was and still is a true mentor and a role model. He was a mentor not only in the academic research, but he was a mentor in the perspective in life, to find the interest in anything. He made me feel that I'm significant and that my research is significant, and that I'm very thankful for him, and it was amazing. And it follows me for everything I do since I met Eshel. After Eshel left us, too soon and unexpectedly, I wanted, in honor of his memory and academic legacy, to focus my research on the hyperbaric medicine. Under Professor Ari Barzilai's guidance, I tested the effects of hyperoxia on the morphology, DNA damage response, and protein expression of the glial cells called astrocytes. And that's, I think, is my small gesture toward Eshel's memory. And I hope that I would continue to study and research in the field of neuroscience in the future, in which I fell in love for Eshel's enthusiasm and the way he taught me to love it. I hope that if I would work hard enough and would keep on studying, maybe one day I could be for someone else even half of what Eshel was for me. Thank you very much.
How do I move the?
Just
Okay.
easiest.
Okay. Hi. So it's been pretty much exactly 1 year since I was sitting right before Shabbat in the United States, and as you know, unfortunately, as I always do, checking my email to see what emergencies I would not be able to deal with for the next 24 hours. And I got an email from Michal that was just unbelievable, and I think even she, writing it, said it was unbelievable, that over the previous night, with unknown causes, Eshel is no longer with us. And ever since that day, it's sort of been increasingly obvious, all the things he was doing. And what I want to do is really talk about his science through my eyes as a collaborator. I collaborated with him for over 30 years. And I think I counted, and I think they're still coming, but I think so far I've actually had 33 papers published together with Eshel and his students and his postdocs. I won't talk as much about my personal experience, except I couldn't help, listening to all the other talks and hearing bits and pieces of my own experiences. I went to Petra with Eshel for my 50th birthday. He insisted, and it was a fantastic trip. He tried to cook dinner in my house, and even with the restrictions of keeping kosher, and the dinner was also not that great, and it made a complete mess over the entire house. And I should mention, in regards to the last speaker, Eshel was incredibly kind to take my son, who was a high school student, into his lab for a summer internship at Tel Aviv University to work on a linguistics project, and not only brought him into the lab and gave him a student to work with, but also made sure that he knew how to find the office, he knew how to feed himself and whatever, and that was an incredible experience for him and also for our family. So I want to talk about my own trip through science with Eshel. It's sort of a story in five acts. It starts in sort of 1984 and 1985 when we both were working originally in competition and then in collaboration on patterns in non-biological materials, I think was already alluded to. And I remember a very specific day during that collaboration which led to these pictures. That day, Eshel came to the laboratory where I was working. It was actually in the oil industry. And we had previously published separately some theoretical ideas about the connection between different types of patterns, and we were looking for some way to sort of show in the laboratory how this was going to work, and we had a long discussion. And then somewhere in the middle of discussion, it turned out that in that oil company laboratory, for reasons that were completely obscure, they had exactly the right piece of equipment for us to test these ideas. So we rushed down to the lab, we sort of pushed aside the sort of Chinese scientist who was working there who had no idea what we were doing. And we immediately generated these beautiful pictures of oil flakes. These were snowflakes that in fact were made of fluids, and it proved our sort of ideas of theory, and it sort of was the sort of quintessential Eshel approach. You just proceed straight ahead, you just try something, and most of the time it works and you really learn something new. And that was my first encounter scientifically with Eshel. We published this paper. Actually, it turns out to be one of our most important papers over the years, together with Nigel, who's also here, and Len, who's also here. So there's some continuity over all the years. As that work proceeded, and there was obviously much work left to be done, and together with the people I mentioned, other people, we sort of made what I think was lasting progress in understanding how patterns worked in the physical world. And at some point, it became sort of obvious to all of us that we should start thinking about maybe some of our ideas could be applied to biology. And again, my memory of that era is really one with Eshel, which is many of my memories of the science. And this was coming back from a Gordon conference, driving from New Hampshire to my house in Connecticut, which is where I was working at the time, about a 2.5 hour drive. And it was a sort of rainy, cold night. And we started discussing what were some problems in biology that perhaps could be studied with the ideas that we had been developing in the physics context. And we discussed many, many things. And Eshel, as he was wont to do when he sort of thought about things and presented them, he would not only show data and pictures, but he also would generate his own ideas in the form of cartoons. These are cartoons from Eshel's talks at that period of time, showing this idea of traveling from non-living world to the living world as a road, and as in our journey, but also as a metaphor in how you actually do this. There are roadblocks along the way. There are dangerous signs where you try to read too much physics into biology. He called that physification of biology. And I always remember these sort of, very amusing cartoons that always became a sort of hallmark of Eshel's presentations. You could hardly have a presentation where you wouldn't see his raw thoughts expressed in this sort of a drawing form. Eventually, Eshel found his way to going across the valley from the non-living world to the living world. And the way he found was through bacteria. And this is an early plate from Eshel's group, growing a bacterial colony in the under poor conditions. And the breakthrough came. There was some work by a Japanese group, and Eshel immediately decided that bacteria were going to be the vehicle by which he was going to understand how the ideas of physics, the ideas of computation, mathematics, complexity would play out in a real-world biological system. And these are ones of, I can't even imagine how many plates there are over the decades, maybe tens of thousands of just beautiful patterns of all different sorts, showing the incredible variety and versatility of the bacteria in making these particular structures. And we worked on this together for a number of years. This was a cover of Scientific American showing one of Eshel's pictures, another one of his cartoons from that era showing how the bacteria needed to be thought of as individuals and how they both had their own identity, but how they were able to form collective structures. And Eshel really brought this area to an amazing mixture of science, philosophy, art, in a way which is just really hard to even capture over those many years. And I wanted to show the movie that Eshel always showed when he talked about bacteria, because many of you have seen this, but I have to show it, assuming it'll play. I'm not going to show all of it, but you all recognize it. So anybody who ever went to a talk about bacteria in that era from Eshel would have seen this production by the BBC that Eshel was involved in, which I'll play a couple of minutes of it just to give you, and until Eshel starts talking, so we can also remember. So it has this introductory part, and then has this part that Eshel really loved of, takes a while. Okay, this is the part that I wanted to show. So the idea was that as bacteria are well-fed and happy, they survive and everything is fine, nothing much exciting happens. But then,
like
as you'll see,
grow, multiply, again and again.
And they basically spend all their time just multiplying. And that's, of course, very important and what most biologists had studied previously. But that wasn't most interesting to Eshel. What was most interesting to Eshel was what happened when times actually became harder.
They knew how to use a screw propeller to push and pull themselves along.
I don't know if you can hear
it. Before Archimedes tumbled to it.
Not always the conditions are favorable with the bacteria. Sometimes they don't have food, or they don't have enough food to maintain a whole colony. When this happens, very new and interesting phenomena are observed. First, they can learn to eat all kinds of strange things, from metals to waste materials.
Although bacteria can move, grow, and multiply,
I don't want to show the whole thing because obviously we don't have that much time. Eshel spent, he never gave up the bacteria. Of course, as we've already heard, he diversified his interests in many, many different directions over the years. But as I think many of us who knew him understood, he always sort of brought a bacterial perspective to many of these other systems. For example, here is some of his work, and again, I also collaborate with him on neural systems. When Eshel switched to something and went and started talking to you, you had no choice but to sort of go along with him for the ride. So we started working on neural systems, and this is from one of Eshel's experiments on the multi-electrode arrays and glial cells. And it's, whoops, wrong way. How did that happen? And I think, Eshel was working on neurons. He was working on econophysics. And in a moment, I'll talk a few minutes about his work on cancer with our group over the last couple of years. But he always brought a perspective that in some sense came from the bacteria. From his point of view, the bacteria were the quintessential example of how you had these really powerful, complicated organisms that under some conditions could do simple things, under other conditions could do more complicated things. As you challenged them, as you gave them harder and harder puzzles to solve, either having to do with not enough food, as he sort of showed in the movie, having to do with not being able to move effectively, they somehow revealed more and more of their secrets. The idea was that we would learn more and more about what these organisms were capable of doing by just asking them to solve harder and harder puzzles, seeing what they were able to come up with, and thereby understand how they were organized, how they themselves thought. And he brought the same idea to neurons. He was interested in how the brain was organized in the same way. He brought the same idea to glial cells. For those of you who work in the neuroscience, Eshel was very fond of trying to find ways in which conventional wisdom was not correct, and so would argue with any neuroscientist about what was the most important thing to talk about. And it always came from this sort of fundamental idea of how complex organisms arrange themselves in these ways to solve these challenges that they were always faced with. The last part of sort of my journey together with Eshel really had to do with working on cancer. Now, as you all know, Eshel's battle against cancer was taking place on two spheres at the same time. There was a professional battle trying to understand, using his ideas from bacteria, from complex systems, how cancer worked, how maybe the immune system interacted with cancer. But of course, at the same time, he was engaged in a more personal battle. And again, he was strongly influenced by this sort of notion of collective intelligence, of complex organisms that cooperated to solve puzzles. And here is the sort of explicit realization of that idea in the context of cancer. On the right-hand side is, again, a cartoon that Eshel would often show, but actually, I don't know if he ever showed the two together, but the top one is humans fighting against bacterial disease, envisaged as a chessboard of a complex human dealing with an equally complex foe in trying to control infectious disease. And on the bottom is a similar battle taking place between humans and cancer cells. Again, the idea not that we're fighting against some simplified, unintelligent foe, but that in order to be able to make progress, one really needed to delve deeply into the complexity, into the collective intelligence of the cancer cells, of the bacterial cells, etc. And we actually wrote a opinion paper about this together with a leading cancer biologist that Eshel introduced me to, Don Coffey, who actually was a previous president of the American Association of Cancer Research. And the idea explicitly says, looking at bacteria to try to get some ideas about how to think about doing new types of research in the direction of cancer. Now, before coming to the last slide, I want to mention one other anecdote about Eshel, because in the context of cancer, because it also sheds another aspect on all of our interactions with him. in the course of trying to work on our cancer research project, we worked for a number of years, developed some new ideas. I think I'll actually talk about this in the scientific session later today. And at some point, we discovered a researcher at our local cancer center who was very interested in possibly collaborating with us and doing some experiments. And so I arranged to have a meeting. His name was Samir Hanash, and arranged to have a meeting with him. And so I took all my students and postdocs, the ones who were interested. I don't think Jose was in town, so I don't think he came. But Eshel was in Israel at the time, even though he had been spending quite a bit of time sort of coming back and forth from Israel to Rice University. And so I arranged for Eshel to take part in this meeting by Skype. And so we have this meeting with Samir Hanash, and somewhere in the middle of the meeting, Eshel decides he needs to ask a bunch of questions and take over the discussion, and starts relating a whole bunch of stories about serving in the Israeli naval intelligence and how that sort of thought. Now, Samir Hanash is Lebanese, and I did not know him at the time, so I had no idea what his politics were, what his even religion was, or anything. I mean, he's just a cancer researcher who was interested in research. In the U.S., we can maybe more afford to just completely ignore these things than it's, but maybe But anyway, that's at least a good approach to just avoid discussing areas which have nothing to do at the end of the day with scientific research. But here at Eshel, as a disembodied voice from the computer, just going on about his days in Israeli intelligence and how serving in the wars had taught him about these lessons of how you fight these foes, and even though they were collectively intelligent. And I was sitting there going, oh no. So it turned out, through some miracle, that Samir Hanash actually is a Lebanese Christian. Actually, he was rather pro-Israel. And actually, when next time Eshel came to Houston, we had a great meeting. We've continued to work with Sam Hanash over the years, and he also found that rather amusing. I was always wondering about that streak of Eshel, just being fearless and being not particularly cognizant of manners or of sort of niceties. And I think I got a new insight into this yesterday. Yesterday, I was privileged enough to go on a tour to some of the moshavim and kibbutzim of the first and second Aliyah. And we met a woman who was 90 years old, who was a child of people who came on the second Aliyah. And she told us that in those days when they went to school, this was in Kinneret, when they went to school, they were told that they were not allowed to be polite as a philosophy. And so I think I learned yesterday that even in other ways that I didn't know about, Eshel was a true pioneer. So anyway, I think those of us who know him felt that Eshel felt he needed to solve everything himself. He needed to do everything. He was going to solve all aspects of complexity. And unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, we know from ancient wisdom that we cannot do everything ourselves. We cannot complete the work. So it says in Pirkei Avot that the day is short, Hayom Chatzer v'hamlacha merubah, that one cannot just complete everything. Eshel's work on cancer, for sure, and his work in other areas is not complete. There's much less left for us to do in his memory and continuing on with the work he did. But Eshel, even though he could not complete all the work, none of us will ever be able to do that. Nonetheless, we believe that he will receive his just rewards for contributing in such a positive way to all our scientific endeavors. With that, thank you very much.
We will try again to show.
Michal, Aya, distinguished guests. It is my great honor to say a few words in memory of Eshel, who was my graduate degree supervisor, my mentor, and my friend. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for providing me this opportunity, and regret I was unable to join the conference in person. I first met Eshel in the fall of 2005 while taking his elective course on complex systems at the end of my undergraduate degree. I was immediately hooked, not only by the topics he covered, but mainly because of how he addressed these topics, and more importantly, his interactions with the students. Working on a project for a grade for that course led to several meetings and discussions throughout that year, as the project kept growing in size rather than coming to an end. I later learned that this was usually how things went with Eshel, who always thought about the next steps. At the end of that year, he offered me to do my master's degree with him. When I had made up my mind to say yes, I went to his office in the late afternoon and told him that I decided to accept his offer and that I hoped he would not be disappointed. He barely knew me at that time. He looked at me with that strong stare of his, and with what I later learned to be his standard conviction, simply said, "I won't." That has always symbolized to me the kind of supervisor Eshel was. He would demand a lot from us students, mainly to be available at all times, but he would also fiercely protect us and fight for us. He did that for me several times throughout my master's and PhD degrees, on both aspects. On the one hand, he defended my research before the school and the faculty. On the other, he would expect me to be available at all times. Once, there was a paper deadline just around the Passover holiday, right after the Seder night dinner. When I told him the paper would have to wait till after the holiday, he told me, "What's the problem? You can work between the courses." And I never been able to figure out if he was kidding or not. I heard that question a lot, especially when he asked me to do something which I either did not understand, did not know how to do, or thought it was too difficult. "What's the problem? It only takes 5 minutes," he would say. That, together with his retort that I don't supervise MATLAB, I supervise students, were sayings I heard many, many times. I am grateful to Eshel for teaching me how to be a researcher and a scientist. It was so important for him to teach, and many, many times after meetings, he would ask me if I saw or if I listened to make sure I learned. I spent many hours in meetings with him, alone and with others, and it was always fascinating and inspiring to see how fast he processed information and was able to juggle so many different topics. In my current job, where I am told that I work on too many projects in parallel, I can hear him laughing. Almost every conversation with him, on Skype or otherwise, would start with him saying, "I'm really busy now and can't talk, but," and then would talk for at least another 30 minutes. I'm grateful for him for teaching me not only how to approach science and how to do science, but also the behind the scenes of the academic world. I am also fortunate to have had Eshel as a friend. One of my favorite memories of Eshel is from my wedding. When I told him I was getting married, his response was, "Good news for you, bad news for science." And for a while, we actually considered using that for the invitation. It was so great that he made it to the wedding, despite having an early flight the following day. After the ceremony, we had some music and dancing, and Eshel dominated the dance floor. That was Eshel, the magnet in the room, whom you couldn't ignore. He was always there for me when I needed him, giving me great advice, and I always knew he had my best interests at heart. I am very lucky to have met Eshel, who played such a significant role in my life. He is greatly missed.
It won't be complete without Michal saying several things about Eshel.
No, actually, I'm not going to talk about Eshel. It's just something
Okay.
that came up. Two things that would not. Well, you know, Eshel, everybody agrees Eshel was a pioneer. It's very hard to get money for pioneering work. So if it weren't for Fred Tauber, Eshel could not have done half of what he had done. Fred supported Eshel financially for how many years? Many years. No words, Fred. And Sami, what you did with the grant, I mean, this is, makes me cry, because this is just what Eshel would have wanted to have, you know, in his memory, this SNP grants. Thank you.
We will take like 2 minutes just to get organized and start the scientific session. Thank you.